The world is experiencing a resurgence in authoritarian populism, and no democratic country has been left untouched. Our presentation will focus on the United States, the oldest continuous democracy in modern history. The drivers behind populism are multifaceted, and our recommendations will focus on three areas: the media space, national identity, and the electoral system. In recent years, the rise of digital media has played a transformative role in shaping the course of power throughout the international system. Modern information technologies allow for instantaneous communication anywhere in the world. The free movement of information across borders was widely expected to spell the end of authoritarianism. However, digital media has become the new tool by which authoritarian leaders and wannabe authoritarian populists seek to control the narrative or obfuscate the truth. The primary example is the rise of Donald Trump in the United States. Donald Trump's use of Twitter to attack his opponents, spread misinformation, and elevate his own narrative at the expense of facts degraded American democracy. Politicians have long used the media to manipulate public perception, but the recent polarization and spread of misinformation requires policymakers to act quickly to mitigate the ability of future authoritarian populists from propagating their message. Our group is proposing the following policy initiatives to contain misinformation: mandating media literacy classes throughout primary and secondary education, and the advocacy for the implementation of the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act. Media literacy training, which is intended to increase the individual's doubt about the media content. The existence of individuals with high media literacy leads to an increase in the media quality. Such individuals require more realistic messages of higher quality. A recent study published by the NIH showed the effect of media literacy training on children. The study's findings revealed the effectiveness of the training program in improving the students' active, critical reaction towards the media's messages. This study indicates a need for Congress to appropriate new funding to incentivize media literacy classes. According to H.R. 4925, Healthy Media for Youth Act, the necessary funding needed to implement a nationwide youth media literacy program was $40 million. While this bill didn't pass in 2011, we can use this $40 million as a reference point to future spending initiatives. In 2018, a story came out about the news company Sinclair Broadcasting Group. This conservative media group owns about 190 mid to small-sized TV stations across the country. In May 2017, the company announced a proposed $3.9 billion merger between themselves and Tribune Media Company, which owns 42 television stations. The merger would have made Sinclair far larger than any other broadcaster in the country, with stations beaming into 70% of American households. While the deal ultimately collapsed, the willingness of the FCC chairman to sign off on it demonstrated the danger consolidation within the media space continues to pose to U.S. democracy. Furthermore, a report by PEN America found that as local journalism declines, government officials conduct themselves with less integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness, and corporate malfeasance goes unchecked. With the loss of local news, citizens are less likely to vote, less politically informed, and less likely to run for office. To push back against media consolidation, the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act could help put money back into the accounts of local media organizations. The act is designed to give news media leverage to negotiate better financial terms with Google and Facebook. The effect would create a new stream of revenue, allowing these local papers and broadcast stations to remain profitable and making it harder for broadcasters such as Sinclair to dominate the local media space. In the process, creating a more competitive information environment. At the moment, the U.S. is losing its story as people across the political spectrum no longer perceive a common narrative. While implementing these policies faces major roadblocks from tech companies and politicians in Congress, recent animus towards big tech companies and the rise in misinformation are creating new incentives for politicians from both parties to make reforms to our media environment.
The self-sorting taking place in America, in which the same demographic groups find themselves in the same neighborhoods, in the same cities, or at the same prestigious universities, has had a destructive effect on national identity and cohesion. This process means that people are less exposed to those different from them than before. Schools are increasingly segregated, the military increasingly relies on the poor, and public discourse increasingly resides in echo chambers. Less exposure to other groups makes polarization easier. Contact theory posits that exposure between two groups can promote tolerance and acceptance. It's time for Americans to get in touch with other Americans. we propose a mandatory national service period of at least 1 year. It will be folded into the selective service and can be completed through a number of different avenues, such as military service, Teach for America, or Peace Corps. The literature supports this idea. In Nigeria, for example, the Nigeria Youth Service Corps has been a mechanism for increasing national pride. It was found that forced exposure to other ethnic groups leads to stronger national identification while increasing preference for in-groups, leading to the idea that national and co-ethnic identities are not substitutes, and both can increase at the same time. We believe that this idea that cross-cutting demographic exposure through mandatory national service can do the same thing here in America, serving to foster a stronger national identity while still maintaining bonds and ties had with the group or the place that one came from. Pushback to implementing such a large program is inevitable due to its high costs and increased bureaucracy. However, the economic costs imposed will be offset by the vocational skills gained by the participants, the boost to the communities in which they're placed, and the long-term benefits to national cohesion. The goals of this recommendation revolve around fostering individual enterprise within the context of a broader framework of national pride to prepare youths for careers in business and public service. These service programs will work to develop a sense of community integration and commitment to tolerance and understanding, while training the participants in a myriad of areas, from teaching and youth development to forestry and agriculture. The participants will be placed in environments that are wholly different from which they were raised, and will support local entrepreneurship and public institutions while gaining exposure to different peer groups. Putting Americans in touch with other Americans in the name of national service will build stronger bonds and a cohesive American identity. The level playing field and shared sense of commitment will give the youth a common narrative. This step can play an instrumental role in forging a new century of citizens committed to each other.
So now that we've explored media reform and national identity, we're going to look at our electoral system. Over the past decade, America's two-party system has become hyper-polarized through primary elections dominated by ideologically extreme voters. This has led to a rise in populism as candidates cater to fringe views. Therefore, the goal of primary reform should be to moderate the nominating process. So how can this be accomplished and what viable options exist? We'll begin by defining the different forms of primary systems that exist in US states before identifying which is best suited to help combat the extremism fueling populism. As a note, our focus is on primary systems for congressional and state offices. Now, the majority of US states conduct their primaries under three generally defined systems. The closed primary is practiced by 14 states and restricts voting to registered party members only. Semi-closed primaries are practiced by another 14 states. This allows the addition of previously unaffiliated voters to cast a ballot in a closed primary. Third is the open primary system, adopted by 21 states, which allows voters of any party, along with independent voters, to ballot in the primary of their choice. Now, the most restrictive and prone to exacerbate extremism is the closed primary system, followed by semi-closed, where radical partisans are able to exert maximum influence. This is why open primaries are considered to be a relative improvement over the closed systems, since cross-party voting may produce some degree of ideological moderation. However, studies on the effectiveness of open primaries to curb polarization is mixed. Likely, this is due to the ongoing issue of low voter turnout that plagues primaries. So one version of primary reform that could potentially make a difference would be an open primary system combined with an effort to boost voter turnout. Potential ways to boost this participation could be to change polling days to holidays or weekends, or to allow for an early voting period for primaries. While open primaries constitute an improvement over the traditional closed system, it does not appear to be an effective enough measure, even if adopted by all 50 states, to mitigate the inflammatory interplay between populist candidates and their voters. Fortunately, a more promising and reform-oriented electoral system currently exists. Known as Top 2, this system has been adopted in variation by 5 states. Whereas open primaries allow voters to choose which party primary they want to vote in, Top 2 allows all voters to consider all primary candidates. And the top 2 vote getters then move on to the general election, even if they are from the same party. Now, what is remarkable about this system is that it fully opens the primary process, being inclusive to every voter and every candidate, including third parties and independents. This prospect allows for the nomination of candidates outside the two-party system who are not ideologically boxed in or beholden to the dysfunctional partisan gridlock. In fact, candidates are incentivized to earn the greatest number of votes from across the political spectrum, not just from committed partisans of one party. As a result, Top 2 can facilitate moderation by favoring candidates' ability to appeal to a broad coalition. A recent study conducted at USC supported this conclusion, stating, quote, Top 2 primaries reduce legislator extremity by almost double the amount of the reduction of open primaries. Meanwhile, a report by the Public Policy Institute of California demonstrated that Top 2 primary actively engages independents in the primary process, resolving one of the shortcomings of open primaries. Top 2 also appears to diversify representation. Since enacted in California in 2012, Black representation in the state legislature has increased by a whopping 50%, while Latino representation increased by 25%. So as we seek to combat the hyperpartisan radicalization that has fueled the rise of populism in the United States, we should consider expanding the Top 2 primary system in order to mitigate the hold of extremists on the process and the corrosive institutional effects of the nominees they elect. Combined with our proposals for media reform and a national service initiative, these policies take a multi-pronged approach to tackling the rise of authoritarian populism in the United States.